My name is Noah, and I'm 28 years old. I never thought a simple piece of paper could hold so much power, or reveal so much about the people sitting around me. The air in Mr. Sterling's law office felt thick, heavy with unspoken resentments and the lingering scent of old money mixed with stale coffee. I sat on a plush, uncomfortable armchair, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, trying to appear nonchalant, but my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to amplify the tension, a countdown to something I both dreaded and, in a strange way, anticipated. Across the polished mahogany table, my Aunt Beatrice sat, ramrod straight, her silver hair pulled back into a severe bun that seemed to match her even more severe expression. As I walked in, just moments before Mr. Sterling began, her eyes, sharp and predatory, had swept over me. I saw the immediate disdain, the familiar roll of those perfectly made-up orbs. It wasn't just a fleeting glance, it was a performance, a silent declaration of my place, or lack thereof, in this family gathering. She pursed her thin lips, a silent message that my presence was an affront, an insult to the memory of dear departed Grandfather Elias. Grandfather Elias. He was the one whose legacy we were here to dissect, to carve up. I hadn't seen him in years, not since I was a teenager, and a series of family squabbles had driven a wedge between us all. My relationship with Aunt Beatrice had always been frosty, a testament to her belief that I was nothing more than a wayward, ungrateful nephew who had squandered any potential. Her disdain was a constant, almost comforting presence in my life, a predictable shadow. I braced myself for the expected, for the crumbs she assumed I'd be fighting over, perhaps a minor antique, a forgotten watch, or a token sum, a pity offering designed to highlight my perceived insignificance. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Sterling began, his voice surprisingly soft for a man who held so much power over our immediate futures. He cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles on the bridge of his nose. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by Aunt Beatrice's impatient tap of her manicured finger against the armrest. I could feel her eyes on me, even without looking, a palpable weight of judgment. This was it, the moment of truth. What paltry sum, what meager item would they deem fit for the black sheep of the family? I was ready for it, ready for the condescending smiles and the quiet, pitying glances that would follow. But I wasn't ready for what came next. Not even close. The air crackled with expectation, and I swallowed hard, preparing for the humiliation. In accordance with the last wishes of Elias Vance, Mr. Sterling's calm voice cut through the silence. I will now proceed with the reading of his final will and testament. He adjusted a page, his gaze sweeping over each of us before settling on the document. The initial portions were, as expected, rather mundane, detailing small endowments to various charities, a few distant cousins I barely knew, and the sale of a rarely used vacation property, the proceeds also designated for charitable causes. Each clause was met with a faint rustle of clothing, a barely perceptible shift in posture from Aunt Beatrice, who seemed to be ticking off items in an invisible mental ledger, her expression unwavering, still steeped in an air of self-importance. I remember distinctly the casual way she smoothed the expensive fabric of her skirt, a gesture of quiet confidence that screamed, "My turn is coming, and it will be substantial." Her eyes, no longer rolling, were fixed on Mr. Sterling with an almost greedy anticipation, barely acknowledging my continued presence. I sat there, a phantom at the feast, simply observing, waiting for the inevitable mention of a meager sum or a forgotten trinket that would be my lot. The air in the room, previously so stifling, now seemed to hum with the low current of her expectation, a stark contrast to my own weary resignation. Then Mr. Sterling's tone shifted, becoming more deliberate, heavier. "And now," he announced, his voice carrying a new weight, "to my immediate family." He paused, allowing the words to hang in the air, creating a dramatic, almost theatrical silence. My breath caught in my throat, not out of hope, but out of a perverse curiosity to see how little Grandfather Elias truly thought of me. Aunt Beatrice leaned forward ever so slightly, a faint, triumphant smile beginning to form on her lips, her eyes darting between Mr. Sterling and me, as if savoring the coming announcement of her vindication. He continued, "To my beloved daughter, Beatrice Vance, I leave a trust fund containing $2 million to be dispersed over 10 years, along with the collection of antique porcelain." Aunt Beatrice's triumphant smile solidified, a slight nod of satisfaction. It was a substantial sum, certainly, but I could almost hear the unspoken, "Is that all?" in her mind. My turn was next. I knew it. My stomach tightened, bracing for the patronizing words, the token gesture. I was already formulating my polite, detached response, ready to accept my fate with a quiet dignity. "And to my grandson, Noah Vance," Mr. Sterling continued, his eyes finally meeting mine, and for the first time, I detected a hint of something unreadable in their depths. My heart, which had just begun to slow, lurched back into a frantic rhythm. This was it. The moment of my official dismissal from the family's significant legacy. I clenched my jaw, preparing for the small, almost insulting bequest I was certain would follow. I could feel Aunt Beatrice's gaze, sharp and triumphant, boring into my side, her silent judgment more piercing than any spoken word. The words that followed were a cold shock, a seismic shift that reverberated through the very foundations of the room, sending ripples through my entire being. "To my grandson, Noah Vance, understanding his independent spirit and wishing for him to finally have a true home," Mr. Sterling enunciated slowly, each word dropping like a stone. "I bequeath the family estate, complete with all its contents, located at 789 Evergreen Lane, valued at approximately $9 million. The silence that followed was not just a pause, it was an implosion. My world tilted, the plush armchair suddenly feeling like a crumbling throne. I felt a jolt, not just emotional, but physical, as if an invisible hand had pushed me backward. My eyes, wide and unblinking, stared at Mr. Sterling, then darted to Aunt Beatrice. Her face, which had been set in a mask of smug assurance, utterly crumbled. Her eyes, instead of rolling, widened to saucers, her jaw dropping almost comically. A low, strangled gasp escaped her lips, audible even over the sudden, collective gasp that rippled through the other, previously quiet family members in the room. Her skin flushed a blotchy red, and the rigid posture she maintained throughout the reading suddenly seemed to crack, as if an invisible force had dealt her a brutal blow. "What?" Aunt Beatrice's voice, usually a controlled, elegant purr, erupted in a sharp, disbelieving shriek, laced with a raw fury that made my ears ring. She pushed herself back in her chair with such force that it scraped loudly against the polished floor, the sound echoing through the stunned silence that had fallen like a shroud. Her gaze, now no longer just disdainful, was a blazing inferno of pure, unadulterated outrage directed squarely at me. She looked at me as if I had personally conjured this unbelievable turn of events, as if I had orchestrated Grandfather Elias's will from beyond the grave. I blinked, still trying to process the words, to make sense of the absurdity. $9 million. The family mansion. Mine. It felt like a cruel joke, a surreal dream from which I was certain to wake up at any moment. My hands, still clasped tightly, began to tremble uncontrollably, a tremor that ran up my arms and settled deep in my chest. The quiet, pitying glances I had prepared for had vanished, replaced by open-mouthed astonishment, shock, and a palpable shift in the energy of the room. It was no longer about my insignificance. It was about an unexpected, monumental betrayal, at least in Aunt Beatrice's eyes. "That's impossible," she spat, her voice thick with venom, her perfectly manicured finger pointing accusingly at me across the table. Her face, contorted in a mask of disbelief and rage, was a sight I would never forget. Her eyes, normally so calculating, were now wild with an almost primal fury, stripping away the veneer of sophisticated composure she had meticulously maintained for years. The air in the room, once heavy with expectation, was now charged with the volatile electricity of shattered illusions and burgeoning resentment, all directed at me, the newly minted heir to Grandfather Elias's most prized possession. My mind reeled, trying to grasp the reality of Mr. Sterling's words. $9 million. The family estate. It wasn't just money. It was the house, the sprawling grounds, the history etched into every wooden beam and brick. The place where I'd spent fleeting childhood summers, filled with the faint scent of my grandmother's rose garden and the sound of grandfather Elias's booming laughter. It was a place I'd believed was irrevocably lost to me, a phantom limb of my past. Aunt Beatrice's screech, however, was very much real, pulling me sharply back to the present, to the volatile energy radiating from her. "This is a mockery," she raged, her voice cracking with fury, the usually composed woman completely unraveling before my eyes. Her hands, adorned with expensive rings, balled into fists on the table, trembling with undisguised wrath. Elias would never. He despised him. Noah, the vagrant, the one who never even bothered to visit. He wouldn't leave him a penny, let alone the entire estate. She lunged slightly across the table, her eyes burning into me, as if daring me to refute her. The other family members, previously silent spectators, began to murmur, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. Mr. Sterling, unflappable, raised a calm hand, his voice cutting through her tirade with surprising authority. "Beatrice, please. These are the explicit instructions of your father. The will was notarized, witnessed, and is entirely sound." He looked at me then, a faint, almost imperceptible flicker of something in his gaze that might have been pity, or perhaps understanding. He seemed to expect this outburst, to have mentally prepared for it. His composure was the only anchor in a room suddenly adrift on a sea of raw, volatile emotions. "Sound?" she scoffed, her laugh a harsh, bitter sound. "It's a fabrication. Noah, tell them you manipulated him. You wormed your way back into his life, didn't you, you pathetic gold digger?" Her accusation stung, hitting a nerve that had long ago healed over, but now throbbed with a fresh ache. I hadn't spoken to grandfather Elias in years, hadn't seen him since I was 16. There was no worming my way back in. This was a revelation, as much to me as it was to her. The thought alone was preposterous, yet her conviction was terrifying. "Aunt Beatrice, I had no idea." I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper, still processing the monumental shift in my reality. My throat felt tight, constricted. The words felt inadequate, hollow against the tide of her volcanic rage. How could I explain that I was just as stunned, just as bewildered by this turn of events? The notion that I had orchestrated any of this was absurd, yet in her eyes, I was undoubtedly a cunning villain, who had somehow pulled the wool over my grandfather's eyes. She ignored me completely, turning her fury back to Mr. Sterling. "There must be a codicil, a later amendment. He spoke of leaving the house to me to ensure the family legacy remained intact." Her voice was shrill, desperate, clinging to a reality that was rapidly crumbling around her. Her face was flushed, her perfect bun now slightly askew, a single strand of silver hair escaping and falling across her furrowed brow, a small, visible crack in her formidable facade. She was losing control, a rare and unsettling sight. "There is no such codicil, Beatrice," Mr. Sterling stated firmly, his tone laced with a hint of finality, closing off any avenue for further argument. He tapped the will gently with his finger, as if emphasizing its irrefutable truth. The air thickened again, but this time it was heavy with the weight of her defeat, the sudden sharp realization that her world had just been irrevocably altered. It was a bizarre, almost comical reversal of fortune that I never, in my wildest dreams, could have anticipated. A moment of pure, raw silence hung in the air, punctuated only by Aunt Beatrice's ragged breathing. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, darted around the room as if searching for an escape, a loophole, a hidden clause that would undo this nightmare. I watched her, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me, disbelief, a nascent sense of triumph, and a faint tremor of apprehension at the sheer magnitude of what had just transpired. This was not just a will, it was a detonation, and I was at its epicenter. "This is an outrage," she finally hissed, her voice low and venomous now, all public fury replaced by a chilling private malice directed solely at me. Her gaze, cold and sharp, promised retribution, a long, drawn-out battle. She stood abruptly, knocking her chair back with a loud clatter that made everyone jump. "You will regret this, Noah. Mark my words, you will deeply regret this." Her exit was abrupt, a dramatic swirl of expensive fabric and simmering rage, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. I remained seated, my hands still trembling, my mind a jumble of thoughts and emotions. The room seemed to exhale, a collective sigh of relief, but the tension lingered, a ghostly echo of Aunt Beatrice's fury. The other relatives avoided my gaze, some clearing their throats, others simply staring at the space where she had been. I was no longer the insignificance, the black sheep. I was now the focal point of their envy, resentment, and probably a great deal of speculation. The mansion, the $9 million, felt less like a gift and more like a heavy crown, suddenly placed upon my unprepared head, weighing me down with an entirely new set of burdens. The silence Aunt Beatrice left behind was not empty, but thick with the ghostly residue of her fury. It hummed in my ears, a low, buzzing current that mirrored the chaos in my own head. My hands, still clasped on my lap, refused to stop trembling. The plush armchair that had felt so uncomfortable moments ago now seemed to absorb me, making me feel strangely weightless, unmoored. I looked at Mr. Sterling, who remained perfectly composed, a stoic island in the storm that had just erupted. He watched the door for a beat, then turned his calm gaze back to me. "Noah," he said, his voice softer now, almost empathetic, "I understand this is a significant surprise. Are you all right?" His question felt strangely gentle, a stark contrast to the earlier legal formalities and the subsequent explosion. I managed a small, almost imperceptible nod, my throat still too tight to form coherent words. It felt less like an inquiry into my immediate well-being and more like a probe into whether I was about to collapse under the weight of this monumental news, this unexpected turning point in my life. "Perhaps," he continued, gesturing vaguely to the other relatives who were still seated, exchanging nervous glances but saying nothing, "we should take a moment. The rest of the will details are administrative, mostly concerning the various trusts and the ongoing management of specific assets. We can discuss your particular inheritance, the estate, in more detail, once you've had a moment to process." His words offered a lifeline, a temporary reprieve from the dizzying reality. He was giving me space, understanding the shock that had rendered me speechless, allowing the dust of Aunt Beatrice's departure to settle. I risked a glance at the remaining family members. My second cousin Philip, usually aloof, now looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Was it envy? Admiration? Most likely it was just plain bewilderment. He quickly averted his gaze when our eyes met, suddenly finding the intricate pattern on the expensive rug intensely interesting. The air was thick with unspoken thoughts, with the raw, undiluted shock that had settled over everyone. The power dynamics in this room, in this family, had irrevocably shifted in a single earth-shattering announcement, placing me at its unexpected apex. "Mr. Sterling," I finally managed, my voice raspy. The mansion. There must be some condition, some explanation." The words tumbled out, a desperate plea for logic in an illogical situation. I couldn't fathom Grandfather Elias, a man who had barely acknowledged my existence for years, bestowing such an immense gift upon me. It went against everything I thought I knew about him, about us. There had to be a catch, a hidden clause, a reason for such an unthinkable act of generosity towards the family's black sheep, the one so readily dismissed. He gave a slight, knowing smile. "Your grandfather was a man of great foresight, Noah, and, as he himself stated, an independent spirit. He believed you would appreciate the freedom, the sense of roots that the estate could provide." He paused, then added, "There are no conditions attached to the immediate transfer of the property, other than the standard legal process. He truly wanted it to be yours, without encumbrance." His words were a definitive answer, yet they only deepened the profound mystery for me, pulling me deeper into the enigma of my grandfather's final wishes. "But why?" I pressed, the single word heavy with a lifetime of unanswered questions. of perceived rejection. Why me? Why not Aunt Beatrice? She was always the dutiful one, the one who stayed close, who managed his affairs. My voice betrayed the disbelief, the lingering doubt that this could truly be my reality. The image of Grandfather Elias, stern and distant, clashed violently with the image of him as a benevolent benefactor. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of that question, the unanswered why that gnawed at my very core, demanding an explanation. Mr. Sterling leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. Your grandfather's reasons, Noah, are his own, but in his own words, written into the preamble of the will, he often spoke of a desire for the estate to truly live again, to be a home, not just a monument. He saw something in you, something he believed would honor that wish. This explanation, while vague, offered a sliver of understanding, a glimpse into a side of Grandfather Elias the First barely knew. He continued. He was very specific about this. He left explicit instructions, not only for the transfer but for ongoing counsel, should you need it. He looked at me expectingly, as if waiting for me to absorb the full implication of his words. I nodded slowly, trying to digest the magnitude of his words. A home, not a monument. Was that what the mansion had become for Aunt Beatrice? A symbol of status, a monument to her perceived importance? Perhaps. My grandfather, it seemed, had seen through the facade, recognized the coldness behind the polished exterior. This wasn't just about money, it was about legacy, about purpose, a profound shift in values. And somehow, in his final act, he had chosen me, the one who had drifted furthest, to carry it forward. The weight of that realization settled upon me, heavier than any crown, a surprising and profound burden. The estate comes with a significant endowment for its maintenance, Noah, and a considerable trust fund specifically for your personal use, beyond the mansion's valuation, Mr. Sterling added, almost as an afterthought, as if trying to cushion the shock further. He slid a folder across the table towards me, a thick packet of documents that felt surprisingly heavy in my unready hands. These outline everything. I suggest you take your time, review them, and we can schedule a more private meeting to discuss the next steps. The quiet authority in his voice was a grounding presence in the tumultuous aftermath. The world had just changed, and I was holding the key to a future I never imagined. The silence, once shattered by Aunt Beatrice's fury, now hummed with a different kind of energy, a palpable awkwardness. The other relatives, though still present, seemed to shrink into themselves, avoiding eye contact, as if the sheer magnitude of the situation might infect them. My hand still clutched the folder Mr. Sterling had given me, its weight a physical manifestation of my new, dizzying reality. It wasn't just paper, it felt like a map to an unknown future, laden with responsibilities I was utterly unprepared for. The idea of Grandfather Elias wanting the house to be a home again resonated with a strange, quiet ache in my chest. Noah. Mr. Sterling's voice broke through my daze, pulling me back to the polished table. He had a way of cutting through the noise, whether it was a lawyer's dry prose or a dramatic outburst. I recommend you don't rush any decisions. Take some time to absorb this. The estate is quite substantial, and there will be many details to manage. He leaned back slightly, a subtle shift in his posture that suggested the formal part of the reading was truly over. I looked down at the folder, the crisp edges of the paper digging into my palm. I don't even know where to begin, I admitted, my voice still a little shaky. The thought of a $9 million mansion with an accompanying endowment was so far removed from my current life, from the small, rented apartment I called home, that it felt like a story being told about someone else. Philip, my second cousin, cleared his throat from across the table. His eyes, though still carefully avoiding mine, flickered toward the folder. Quite the surprise, Noah, he mumbled, his tone laced with an almost imperceptible blend of envy and forced politeness. His usual aloofness had given way to a nervous fidgeting, a testament to the seismic shift in our family's pecking order. Mr. Sterling, sensing the lingering tension, spoke up. Indeed, Philip, a testament to Elias's unique vision. He stood, signaling the end of the meeting, at least for the general family. I'll be in touch, Noah, to arrange that private consultation. We'll go over everything at your pace. He offered a small, reassuring smile, a rare display of warmth from the usually unreadable lawyer. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, I managed, standing slowly, my legs still feeling a little like jelly. The full weight of Grandfather Elias's words, a true home, pressed down on me. It wasn't just about the money or the property. It was about the intention behind it, an intention that suddenly made the old man seem less distant, less stern, and more complex. As the other relatives began to gather their belongings, their whispers growing louder, though still carefully out of my immediate earshot, I felt a strange sense of detachment. It was as if I was watching a scene unfold, rather than being a central figure in it. The air was still thick with the residue of their shock, their unspoken judgments, their sudden re-evaluation of me. Philip, on his way out, paused beside me. He leaned in conspiratorially, his voice low. Listen, Noah. If you need any, advice or help with the house, it's a lot to manage, a place that size. There was a hint of calculation in his eyes, a flicker of opportunistic thought, but I simply nodded, still too overwhelmed to properly process his thinly veiled offer of assistance. I'll keep that in mind, Philip, I replied, my voice flat. I knew what he was doing, or trying to do. This wasn't an olive branch. It was an attempt to stake a claim, to insert himself into the orbit of my newfound wealth. The shift in everyone's demeanor was jarring, a stark illustration of how quickly loyalty and perceived status could change. Mr. Sterling caught my eye from the doorway, a subtle shake of his head warning me against any immediate commitments. He seemed to understand the vultures were circling. He was my anchor for now in this bewildering new current. The silence that had descended was not calm, but a deceptive quiet, filled with the buzzing of my own disoriented thoughts and the unseen machinations of a family suddenly seeing me in a very different light. The echoes of Aunt Beatrice's fury still vibrated in the air, a physical pressure against my eardrums even after the room had emptied of most of its occupants. Philip's opportunistic whisper lingered, a faint, unsettling reminder that my newfound wealth had already painted a target on my back. Mr. Sterling remained, a silent guardian against the encroaching silence, watching me with an almost paternal concern. He seemed to understand the seismic shift that had just occurred in my life far better than I did. My gaze drifted to the folder still clutched in my hands, its weight a heavy promise of a future I hadn't asked for, didn't even know how to begin to navigate. Noah, Mr. Sterling began again, his voice a soft balm against the raw edges of my shock. It's important that you take your time. This isn't merely about an inheritance. It's about a significant lifestyle change, a responsibility that your grandfather entrusted specifically to you. He motioned towards the empty seats, indicating the other relatives who had departed, leaving us alone in the quiet office. They will try to contact you, offer assistance. Be wary. Your grandfather was well aware of the nature of family, and he took great pains to protect your claim. I swallowed, the dryness in my throat making speech difficult. He took pains? The words felt foreign on my tongue, tinged with a bitterness I hadn't realized was still there. He barely spoke to me for over a decade. He cut me off, Mr. Sterling. After my grandmother passed, it was like I ceased to exist in his eyes. The confession slipped out, raw and unbidden, a lifetime of hurt surfacing in the aftermath of this bewildering generosity. My mind struggled to reconcile the image of the cold, distant patriarch with the man who had just made me wealthy beyond my wildest dreams. Elias had his reasons, Noah, Mr. Sterling replied gently, his gaze unwavering, full of a quiet understanding. And perhaps, in his own way, this was his attempt to mend bridges, to ensure the estate became what he always envisioned it to be, a living home, not a museum piece. He told me several times that you possessed a certain spark, a freedom he felt was essential for the house to thrive. The lawyer's words offered a glimpse into Grandfather Elias's private thoughts, a side of him I had never known. It was a striking image, the stern old man, contemplating the vibrancy of a spirit he had seemingly dismissed. A faint, almost ethereal image of the mansion floated into my mind. The grand oak tree in the front yard, its branches sprawling like ancient arms, a swing hanging from one of them where I'd spent countless hours as a child, lost in my own world. The faint scent of honeysuckle from the garden, carried on a summer breeze. These were not memories of Grandfather Elias, but of the house itself, a silent witness to my youth. Could he truly have seen that connection, that hidden thread between me and the sprawling, silent edifice? A spark? I repeated, the word tasting strange. I'm not sure what spark he saw, Mr. Sterling. My life isn't exactly thriving. I work 2 part-time jobs just to make ends meet. I felt a pang of self-consciousness, a sudden vulnerability at exposing the gritty reality of my existence to this man of refined composure and immense wealth. My current apartment was barely bigger than this office, certainly a stark contrast to the sprawling estate that was now, apparently, mine. He saw potential, Noah, Mr. Sterling said with a soft smile. He spoke of your resilience, your quiet independence. He believed you would protect it, not exploit it. And that, in his eyes, was worth more than any familial obligation. He leaned back, his hands steepled before him. We need to schedule a walkthrough of the property for you, and we'll need to discuss the trust fund for its maintenance and your personal trust. There's a team of estate managers already in place, but you will be the final authority now. The weight of final authority settled on me, an immense, suffocating responsibility. My mind, still reeling, tried to grasp the enormity of managing a $9 million property, let alone the teams associated with it. It was like being handed the keys to a spaceship when I barely knew how to drive a car. A deep silence descended, not the furious silence left by Aunt Beatrice, but a quiet, contemplative one. It was the silence of a beginning, full of untold questions and the vast echoing space of possibility. I found myself looking out the window at the city skyline, a world away from the tranquil, sprawling estate that was now my destiny. My gaze settled on a single, distant cloud, a faint wisp against the stark blue, and I wondered if Grandfather Elias, wherever he was watching. Was this his final, elaborate joke? Or a genuine gesture of reconciliation, a silent apology for the years of distance? The striking image of his stern face softened, just for a moment, in my mind's eye, replaced by a ghost of a smile, and then it was gone. The silence deepened, filling the room with an almost sacred hush, the faint whisper of a new life unfolding, unheard by anyone but me. The quiet hum of the city, previously a distant, muffled drone, now seemed to press in on me with a new, overwhelming intensity as I stepped out of Mr. Sterling's office building. The midday sun, a blinding contrast to the dim, hushed confines of the law firm, made me squint. The folder, still heavy in my hand, felt less like a gift and more like a hot coal, scorching my palm with its unexpected weight. My legs, though steady, moved as if navigating unfamiliar terrain, each step uncertain, my mind still replaying Mr. Sterling's calm pronouncements, Aunt Beatrice's enraged shriek, and Grandfather Elias's baffling final wish. A cool breeze ruffled my hair, bringing with it the scent of exhaust fumes and freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery. Mundane details that anchored me, however briefly, to a world that felt suddenly alien. I hailed a cab mechanically, the familiar yellow blur pulling up to the curb. Sliding into the back seat, I gave my address, a small, unremarkable apartment building, and leaned my head against the cool window. The city lights began to blur as we pulled away, mirroring the dizzying chaos swirling within me. This wasn't just a $9 million house. It was a universe, a gravitational pull of responsibility that had abruptly yanked me into its orbit. My phone, a cheap, worn device, vibrated incessantly in my pocket. I pulled it out, seeing a flurry of missed calls and text messages, a sudden eruption of digital activity from numbers I barely recognized, and some I did, but rarely heard from. Cousin Brenda, who usually only resurfaced for holiday dinners, had sent 3 separate texts, each progressively more enthusiastic, offering any help at all with the estate. Her words felt like sticky tendrils, already trying to latch on. I pressed the power button, plunging the screen into darkness, craving a silence that no longer seemed attainable. Noah, Is everything all right? The cab driver asked, his voice cutting through my thoughts, catching my reflection in the rearview mirror. He'd noticed my vacant stare, the folder still clutched in my hand. His concern, however fleeting, was a small, unexpected kindness. I forced a smile, a brittle, unconvincing facade. Yes, just a long day. I managed, the words feeling like gravel in my throat. It felt impossible to explain, to articulate the seismic shift that had just occurred in my world. To a stranger. Later that evening, back in my small apartment, the contrast between my cramped reality and the sprawling estate became an almost unbearable weight. I stood by the window, looking out at the brick wall of the building opposite, the sound of my neighbor's television faintly bleeding through the thin walls. The air, usually a comforting familiar, now felt claustrophobic. The mansion, with its vast rooms and sprawling gardens, seemed to mock my current confines, a colossal shadow cast over my modest existence. It was a tangible representation of everything I didn't know how to handle. A soft knock at the door startled me. My landlord, perhaps? No, it was too late for that. I opened it cautiously, and there, standing awkwardly in the hallway, was Philip. His usual designer suit was slightly rumpled, his tie loosened. He held a bottle of expensive-looking champagne, an almost desperate grin on his face. "Noah, my man, heard the news. Incredible, simply incredible," he exclaimed, his voice a little too loud for the narrow hallway, his eyes scanning past me into my humble apartment. "Philip," I said, my tone flat, "what are you doing here?" His sudden appearance felt like an invasion, the very thing Mr. Sterling had warned me about. His grin wavered slightly, but he pushed past it, trying to exude a forced camaraderie. He'd never visited me before, not once in our entire lives. This was not a friendly call. It was a calculated reconnaissance mission, a blatant display of opportunism. Just wanted to congratulate you, naturally, and, well, see how you're doing. A place like that. It's a lot to take on, isn't it? He gestured with the champagne bottle, its label glinting under the dim hallway light. Maintenance alone, the staff, the taxes. It's a whole different ballgame. Most people would be lost. But I, of course, have a lot of experience with large properties investments. His words trailed off, a thinly veiled offer of help that felt more like a fishing expedition, probing for my weaknesses. "I'm sure Mr. Sterling will be able to advise me on all of that," I replied, keeping my voice even, trying to maintain an unreadable composure. The last thing I needed was Philip, or anyone else, inserting themselves into this already bewildering situation. The thought of navigating Grandfather Elias's will, let alone the legacy attached to it, felt like trying to solve an impossible riddle. Philip's smile tightened, his initial enthusiasm clearly deflating at my cold reception. "Right, Sterling, of course. Just, if he gets too bogged down, or if you need a fresh perspective, an objective party. I'm here for you, Noah," he insisted, his voice dropping slightly, now tinged with a feigned sincerity. He took a small step closer, his eyes darting around my living room, taking in every detail of my modest life. It was a stark reminder of the social chasm that had always existed between us, now shockingly bridged by Grandfather Elias's will. I took a breath. The scent of his expensive cologne a stark contrast to my apartment's usual scent of old books and instant coffee. "I appreciate the thought, Philip, but I think I need some time to process everything first." My words were polite, firm, a clear dismissal. He sighed, sensing his attempt was failing. The expensive champagne bottle felt like a prop, now useless in his hands. He was a visible manifestation of the vultures Mr. Sterling had warned me about, hovering and circling. "All right, well, don't be a stranger, Noah," he mumbled, his forced smile finally giving way to a flicker of annoyance and disappointment. He turned and shuffled away, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. The sound of his retreat a small victory, but one that tasted oddly hollow. The quiet returned, but it was no longer peaceful. It was laden with the buzzing energy of unseen forces, of expectations, and the daunting path ahead. The quiet that enveloped my apartment after Philip's departure was thick, almost suffocating. no longer peaceful but laden with the buzzing energy of unseen forces, of expectations, and the daunting path ahead. The click of the lock on my door, a small, mundane sound, felt like a definitive closing on one chapter of my life, and an equally definitive, though terrifying, opening to another. I leaned back against the cool wood of the door, eyes closed, letting out a slow, shaky breath. The scent of Philip's expensive cologne, sickly sweet and out of place, still lingered in the air, a phantom reminder of the greed that now felt like a tangible presence just beyond my humble walls. My small living room, usually a sanctuary, now seemed to shrink around me, its familiar comfort dissolving into claustrophobia. The quiet, once a welcome companion, became a deafening echo of my own disoriented thoughts. What had Grandfather Elias truly intended? Was this inheritance a gift or a test? A final, perplexing puzzle from a man who had always been an enigma, even when he was alive and ostensibly a part of my family. I walked to my worn armchair, the one with the faded floral pattern, and sank into it, the folder still heavy in my lap. The image of Grandfather Elias, stern and unyielding, flickered in my mind. Mr. Sterling's words resonated. He saw something in you, something he believed would honor that wish. A spark, resilience, quiet independence. Did he truly see those things, or was he projecting a romanticized ideal onto the grandson he had, by all accounts, cast aside? I remembered a specific summer when I was perhaps 10, and a terrible thunderstorm had knocked out power to the mansion. Grandfather Elias, instead of panicking, had lit dozens of candles, creating an ethereal glow that transformed the cavernous rooms into something magical. He'd told me stories by candlelight that night, tales of his youth, of his own struggles, a rare glimpse into a softer side I rarely saw. It was a fleeting memory, almost forgotten, yet it surfaced now with a new clarity, tinged with a melancholic nostalgia. He hadn't been a monster, just a distant, complicated man. But the question remained, why me? Why had he bypassed Aunt Beatrice, who had dutifully attended to his every need, managed his social calendar, and upheld the family name with an iron fist? What had she done to incur such a profound final rejection from him? Or rather, what had I done to warrant such a radical, bewildering blessing? It felt less like a reward and more like an impossible burden, a crown of lead. I picked up the folder, its contents still a blur of legalese and incomprehensible figures. $9 million. A sprawling estate, the maintenance endowment, my personal trust. It was all too much, a tidal wave of responsibility crashing over my modest, unburdened life. I had always valued my independence, the freedom that came with having little to lose. Now I felt tethered, weighed down by an invisible chain forged from unexpected wealth. The prospect of managing such an empire felt like a cruel joke, a cosmic prank played on a man who struggled to keep his budget balanced. My thoughts drifted to Aunt Beatrice, her face contorted with rage, her promises of retribution. She wouldn't let this go. Her fury, though unsettling, was almost predictable. But it was the quiet, calculating glances of the other relatives, the sudden shift in Philip's demeanor, that truly unsettled me. The will had not just divided assets. It had exposed the raw, ugly underbelly of family dynamics, revealing the depths of envy and self-interest that had always lurked beneath the polite facade. The mansion wasn't just a home, it was a battleground, and I was unknowingly caught in the crossfire. A soft, almost imperceptible sigh escaped my lips. The city outside my window continued its ceaseless hum, unaware of the turmoil within me. It felt as if I was standing on the precipice of a vast, unknown landscape, a landscape I was wholly unprepared to navigate. Mr. Sterling's calm assurance about Grandfather Elias's foresight felt less comforting now and more like a challenge. The house, Grandfather Elias had wanted it to be a home, not a monument. But how could it be a home if it was tainted by resentment, by the very family it was meant to bring together? The idea of a true home echoed in my mind, a whisper from the past, from a man who had seemingly denied me one for so long. Was this his final, silent apology? Or was it a last elaborate attempt to manipulate the lives of those he left behind, even from the grave? The silence that followed was heavy with these unanswered questions, a profound quietude that felt less like peace and more like a void, waiting to be filled with the complex tapestry of my new, unexpected destiny. The quietude that had settled over my apartment was not one of peace, but a heavy, echoing void, a space that Grandfather Elias's will had ripped open in the fabric of my life. The concept of a true home bounced around in my skull, a phrase Mr. Sterling had relayed, an almost poetic notion from a man whose stern exterior had always suggested anything but poetry. I rose from the armchair, restless, drawn to the window again. The city lights glittered like scattered diamonds on a black velvet cloth, each one a distant life, a separate story, utterly unaware of the seismic shift that had occurred in mine. This inheritance wasn't a simple transaction. It was a legacy, a question mark, a burden, and perhaps a final act of communication from a man who had chosen silence for so long. I tried to recall more details about that stormy night, the one with the candles, the one where Grandfather Elias had, for a brief moment, shed his formidable mask. He had spoken of the house, even then, not as property, but as a living entity, a breathing structure that absorbed the laughter and the tears of generations. Houses, he'd murmured, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it, the flickering candlelight casting long dancing shadows on the walls. Are reflections of the souls who inhabit them, Noah. They remember. It was a rare, vulnerable moment, a fleeting crack in the granite facade, and it now resonated with an almost unbearable poignancy, a whisper from a fading presence. Could this then be his way of ensuring the house remembered him, through me? Or was it an act of defiance, a final, cutting blow to Aunt Beatrice delivered from beyond the grave? The more I considered it, the less clear his motives became. He was a man of immense contradictions, a patriarch who valued tradition, yet defied it in his final act. His image in my mind wasn't just stern anymore. It was layered, shrouded in an enigma that only deepened with each passing hour, a complex tapestry woven from forgotten memories and shocking revelations. The sheer scale of the responsibility still felt abstract, a problem for someone else, not for the man who worried about next month's rent. $9 million. The estate. The endowment. It was a universe I had no map for, and the thought of navigating it alone was daunting. Mr. Sterling's offer of ongoing counsel was a slender thread of sanity in this whirlwind, but even he couldn't manage the emotional weight, the sheer existential dread of being thrust into such a role. My independence, once my most prized possession, now felt like a fragile shield against an onslaught of expectations. And then there was Aunt Beatrice. Her rage wasn't a fleeting storm. It was a simmering volcano, waiting for its next eruption. She wouldn't just let it go. Her parting words, "You will deeply regret this," echoed with a chilling certainty. It wasn't just about the money for her, I realized. It was about perceived injustice, about status, about a lifetime of loyalty unrewarded, at least in her eyes. The mansion, the very place Grandfather Elias had wanted to be a true home, was already a source of bitter division, a silent battleground. I imagined walking through its grand, empty halls, the dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight, each room holding untold stories, some of them mine, some of them Grandfather Elias's, many of them forever lost. Would I find solace there, a sense of belonging, or would the ghost of Beatrice's fury and the weight of my grandfather's puzzling intentions always cling to the walls, preventing it from ever truly being a home? The question hung in the air, unanswered, a whisper that seemed to come from the very depths of the silence. It was a strange feeling, this sudden, radical shift in my trajectory. One day, I was just Noah, 28, scraping by. The next, I was Noah, the unlikely heir, tethered to a legacy I barely understood, entangled in a family drama that felt both absurd and terrifyingly real. My life, once a small, navigable stream, had abruptly widened into a vast, unpredictable ocean. The city lights outside my window now seemed to blur, losing their individual sparkle, merging into a single overwhelming glow that reflected the immense uncharted territory of my future. The memory of grandfather Elias telling me stories by candlelight, his voice a low rumble in the darkness, came back once more. He had said, "Every journey, Noah, begins with a single step into the unknown, and every home, no matter how grand, starts as an empty space, waiting for a heart to fill it." His words, once just a childhood memory, now felt like a profound prophecy, a universal insight reaching across the chasm of time and death. The mansion wasn't just a place, it was an empty space waiting, and I, Noah, was the one chosen to fill it. But with what? With resentment, fear, and the lingering echoes of family feuds, or with something new, something hopeful, a reflection of the spark grandfather Elias believed he saw in me. The city's distant hum was a constant, almost hypnotic drone, a counterpoint to the profound quiet within my apartment, a quiet that was slowly, imperceptibly, filling with the silent promise of a different kind of destiny. The quiet that had settled within my apartment no longer felt heavy, but curiously expansive, a profound quietude that seemed to stretch beyond the thin walls, mirroring the vastness of the future now laid before me. The city's distant hum remained, a soft counterpoint, but it was no longer a symbol of my small life, rather a distant murmur of a world I was slowly, imperceptibly, preparing to re-enter. Grandfather Elias's words, about every journey beginning with a single step and every home waiting for a heart, resonated with a clarity that finally pierced through the fog of shock and confusion. He wasn't just leaving me a house, he was leaving me a paradox, a challenge, a chance. I closed my eyes, picturing the mansion not as a battleground, not as a monument, but as that empty space he had described, waiting. The image that formed in my mind wasn't the stern, imposing edifice I remembered, nor the grand symbol of Aunt Beatrice's perceived status. Instead, I saw sunlight filtering through tall, arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a silent promise of new beginnings. I saw the vast, untamed garden, not as a burden, but as a place waiting for hands to tend it, for life to bloom anew. It was an image imbued with a fragile hope, a stark contrast to the despair that had clouded my vision for so long. The immediate sting of Aunt Beatrice's fury, the unsettling dance of Philip's opportunism, began to recede, not vanishing entirely, but dimming into the background. They were part of the story, yes, but no longer the dominant narrative. My grandfather, the enigmatic figure who had orchestrated this seismic shift, felt less like a distant, cold patriarch and more like a complex, flawed human being who, in his final act, had tried to communicate something profound. Perhaps his distance had been a form of observation, a silent assessment of the spark he claimed to see. My independence, once a shield, now felt less like a solitary fortress and more like a foundation upon which something new could be built. The weight of responsibility was still immense, but it was no longer crushing. It was becoming a force, a propulsion. I wasn't just inheriting money, I was inheriting a chance to redefine home, not just for myself, but perhaps for the legacy grandfather Elias truly intended. The mansion wasn't a prison, it was a canvas, waiting for my brushstrokes. A deep sigh escaped me, this one not of resignation, but of nascent purpose. The questions of, why me, began to transform into, what now? The fear didn't completely dissipate, but it was joined by a quiet, determined resolve. I had spent years adrift, a ghost in my own family, and now, ironically, the family's ghost had given me roots, albeit bewildering ones. The path ahead was still uncharted, filled with potential pitfalls and challenges, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like my path, chosen not by default, but by a strange, undeniable twist of fate. The soft glow of my phone's screen, still dark, served as a tangible reminder of the world waiting outside, the one buzzing with new expectations. I wouldn't answer the calls of the opportunists. I would take Mr. Sterling's advice, step by measured step, and let the dust settle. The mansion was there, a silent promise. And I, Noah, would discover what kind of home it was meant to be. not just a monument to a past, but a living, breathing testament to a future, however uncertain. The profound quiet in my apartment deepened, no longer a void but a space for contemplation. I imagined the vast, empty rooms of the mansion, bathed in moonlight, waiting. The memory of my grandfather's voice, a distant murmur in the candlelit darkness of my childhood, seemed to whisper, "Every home remembers." And in that silent understanding, a new journey truly began, one step at a time, into the vast, echoing space of possibility, waiting for a heart to fill it.